So, as I sit here and I sip my tea before bed, I want to let you guys know that as of tomorrow, we will be having a pretty long and in depth video where I will be finally talking about what I told you concerning the Torah, the law. About a week ago now, we are going to be looking at it. It's going to most likely be pretty reasonably long. We're going to look at several scriptures in the Renewed Covenant, New Testament. We're going to look at some of the places, specifically in Shaul and Paul's writings, some places that people really take him out of context. A lot of the believers, people who are part of the Christian faith today, they unfortunately misunderstand a lot of the things that Paul says, and they use it as an excuse to say that the Torah, the law of Father, is not to be observed, that it has no hold on believers. We are going to be looking at the true nature of Torah, so tomorrow's video will be focused on that. It's not going to be super exhaustive because something that I know from a lot of experience, and it's also just the nature of man, is if somebody is predisposed to believe a certain way, especially if they were raised or brought up either over a lifetime or even in a assembly in a church to believe a certain way, for the most part, you're never going to get anybody to feel differently. The video I'm going to do is mostly going to be geared toward people who do not already have a predisposition one way or the other, because you can have someone who sits down and they expound and they open up and translate scriptures in one way. And when I say translate, I mean not in the literal sense where you're translating, but to understand, to interpret the scriptures in one way, and then you're going to have somebody else come along, and if they are dogmatic and believing a certain way and they don't want to change their mind, they're going to intentionally interpret it in an entirely different way. So, as with most of my teachings, and I've said this before, I don't do what I do for people that are just dogmatically predisposed to believe how they believe no matter what, and they'll argue with you till they're blue in the face. I don't do my videos for people like that. I realize that what I do, teaching the people that Father leads me to, are mostly going to be for the people that are either very open-minded and are willing to listen, and most people, for the most part, it's going to be for the group that have never been brought in to believe something or to be predisposed to a certain kind of belief. So when I do this video that's going to be released tomorrow or the next day, whenever it's uploaded, it's not going to be so long and exhaustive where I'm going to be beating people's heads against a brick wall because I'm just trying to get someone who is stubbornly adhering to their own pet theologies to change their mind. I'm going to say it's very likely it'll probably end up being an hour long, maybe longer, but it's mainly going to hit on a few very practical, very common sense points concerning the Torah and the law of Father. And it's going to really hit on one particular very powerful verse in Shaul, in Paul's writings, that is really going to shed a lot of light on the subject. So that's going to be tomorrow or the next day whenever it finally uploads. But today, I want to talk about something tonight for me that is very important for anybody to understand who is walking a difficult, close walk of faith with Father. In Bereshith, Genesis, and just some of the first few chapters, Enoch pops up in the narrative. The seventh son down from Adam. Not a lot is known about him in the standard canonical writings of the scriptures. Not to say there's not a lot about Enoch. All that you really find out about him in Bereshith and Genesis is that he walked with Elohim, and then he was not, for Elohim took him. Now, there's much more, as I said, to be found about Enoch, and where you find out the most about him is obviously in the book of Enoch. which comprises about 100 and some chapters. I've read the book of Enoch. I love it. It's a wonderful, very inspired writing. For anybody who says or throws any kind of aspersion or doubt on the writings of Enoch, as with most things, I have one very clear, simple reply that just demolishes all those arguments. And that's, look at the epistle of Yehuda of Jude in the Canonical Renewed Covenant New Testament. It's in all Bibles, it's the epistle, the book, right before Galliana, Revelation. And in the one chapter book of Yehuda of Jude, he literally, and this is one of Yahshua's disciples, mind you, he literally references not just Enoch, but the literal writings of Enoch, and he actually quotes the passage in that first chapter that he actually quotes about Enoch literally comes right from the actual book of Enoch itself. So, I mean, one of Yahshua's disciples quoted Enoch, and it's still right there in the canonical scriptures today. The reason why that the book of Enoch was left out of the canonized scriptures had a lot to do with theological, ecclesiastical politics, and a lot of theological controversy of the predominant religious power that was rising at the time within the faith. When the scriptures were ratified in the late 3rd, 4th centuries and they were canonized, essentially the Roman Catholic Church, well, basically the very early Roman Church, what became the Roman Catholic Church as we know it, there was a lot of controversy on their view of the book of Enoch. A lot of the doctrine and the dogma that started to emerge from the ecclesiastical meetings, the councils that decided church doctrine, theology, and even, what is considered canonical scripture, which took place over a couple 100-year period. Some scholars are a little bit iffy on the timeline, but most people place it between the 3rd to 6th centuries. But the writings of Enoch, it was hard for the theological, ecclesiastical leaders of the time, which ecclesiastical literally just basically pertains to the assemblies at the time, the churches that were deciding matters of what will be considered doctrine within the bounds of the Roman-led church. There was a lot of issues with the theology that they were forming in harmonizing it with some of what was taught in Enoch. Now, that's not because the writings of Enoch did not coincide with the writings of the apostles, the apostolic writings, or that it didn't harmonize with the writings of Yahshua. It was actually just the opposite. It can be argued with great weight that without and I've said this before, without the writings of what's considered the Apocrypha, and even without the writings of Enoch, you would not have really ever had a messianic movement. There would have been no believers in Yahshua, because a lot of the writings in the Apocrypha, even the Book of Enoch, actually gives a lot of weight and support to who Yahshua was and the claims that Yahshua made, that he was indeed the promised suffering Messiah who would give his life for the sins of the world. The Book of Enoch, therefore, wasn't cast out of the canon because it was considered a forgery or fake. It was because it was hard for the ecclesiastical leaders of the time and the forming Roman church to harmonize the doctrines they were coming out with what the Book of Enoch taught. So like in a lot of other books of Scripture, it was simply waylaid. And even if it wasn't totally gotten rid of, there was a pretty stern warning on reading those books. And in other cases, even if they weren't banned, the books were given a less than inspired nature. A lot of the apocryphal writings, or even the Book of Enoch, would be preached in such a way to say, not to say there's nothing good in them, but they're not the quality of the inspired scripture. Well, who's the one that decided what was inspired scripture? That was a debate of a lot of politicking in the assemblies at the time. A lot of politicking, a lot of theological disruptions and disagreements from different ecclesiastical leaders and groups within the assemblies of the Roman-led church for a few hundred years. But again, all you have to really do is go and look at the book of Yehuda, of Jude, you literally find him quoting Enoch, a passage right out of the book of Enoch. It's right there. I mean, we could get into how actually some of the things that Yahshua preached and talked about literally harmonizes, and it comes right out of the book of Enoch, such as Lazarus in the bosom of Abraham, and the rich man who was suffering in Sheol, and how he asked Lazarus to give him a drop of water to cool his tongue. And then Abraham said to the rich man that there was a chasm separating the rich man who was in suffering in Sheol from Lazarus, who was in the bosom of Abraham, and that the chasm cannot be separated. But in the book of Enoch, it actually talks about Sheol in a lot greater detail than the canonical scriptures, what's in the 66 books of the Bible today, go into any form of detail over. And the book of Enoch actually talks about a literal physical spring of water in Sheol, specifically in the place where the righteous in the bosom of Abraham were. So when Yahshua was actually telling that parable about Lazarus and the rich man asking for just a drop of cool water, the reason Yahshua was telling that is because where in Sheol that this narrative was taking place at, it's a very real place, a very real point of stasis, and the water that was mentioned, Lazarus would have had actual access to, because there was a literal living spring of water where Lazarus was in the bosom of Abraham. And again, Yahshua references, he talks about it, and you find that exact same place, that exact same spring of water in the book of Enoch. So, I mean, we could look into things like that all day long. You could look into how some of the things that was mentioned in the scriptures in the renewed covenant takes and pulls right directly from the book of Enoch, but that's not the point of today. The point is, in Gilliana and Revelation, we find one main mention of Enoch, and then he's not talked about anymore until way down the road in the book of Yehuda, of Jude, when he's actually quoted. A passage from the book of Enoch is quoted, a prophetic passage. But the point of that is, and telling you that just because the book of Enoch was not put into modern canonized Bibles does not delegitimize him. It does not mean that he was a nobody. It doesn't mean that he was unimportant. He was incredibly important. And without Enoch and the writings of Enoch, one could very easily argue and say that there never would have been a Yahshua, a messianic movement when he came along. Enoch was very, very important. All the patriarchs, Avraham, Abraham, Yitzhak, meaning Isaac, Yaakov, meaning Jacob, they all had reverence for him. The Nevi'im, the prophets, I mean, even Daniel in the book of Daniel, where you find the mention of the Watchers, that literally that's a reference straight out of the book of Enoch. There's also the fact that, a lot of people made the argument for years that the book of Enoch was just a Greek forgery. And that was one of the reasons why that, it shouldn't be included into the canon, is it's a forgery. It was a much later invention. It had absolutely no pull and influence on the early believers, on the patristic writers, on the patriarchs. It was a later invention in the Greek. But yet, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the Qumran caves in 1945, 1947, fragments of the book of Enoch were found in 7 of the caves. And that literally shows that going all the way back to before the time of Yahshua, the books of Enoch were very well known. They were still being recorded. They were still being maintained. And they were given great respect and reverence to. So, regardless of all of that, the fact of the matter is, when in Bereshith in Genesis, it makes the comment about how Enoch walked with Elohim, with Father, and then he wasn't, for Father took him. What I recommend you do sometime is I do recommend that you go and you read the book of Enoch. Some versions of the book of Enoch are translated in Jacobean English, which is the very old form of English that the original King James was translated into. Some versions are admittedly in a very archaic form of English, but other forms of the translations of the Book of Enoch have been translated in a more modern form of English. So, a mother actually downloaded and paid for an app. It was actually the Ethiopian Bible, which, as a funny, cool side note, the Ethiopian churches, assemblies that existed independently from the Roman Church, from most of the other assemblies of the East. The Ethiopian churches never had anything to do with any of the Roman-led councils from the Roman Catholic Church. They never had anything to do with them. The Ethiopians and their assemblies actually kept the Book of Enoch as well as most of the Apocrypha in their Bible and their canon all the way up until the present day. And if it wouldn't have actually been for the Ethiopian Bible, then I think it was in 1700s or 1800s. I have to check my timeline again. But a Scottish explorer literally brought the manuscripts, some of the manuscripts of the Ethiopian Bible, including the Book of Enoch, and introduced it back into the West. That's a cool little historical timeline. You can look at all that for yourself. But, as a cool side note, without the Ethiopian Bible, then the Book of Enoch would have never been brought back into the West. But, for instance, there's a app that my mother found that she paid for that actually has the Apocrypha and the Book of Enoch in it, and it's translated in more modern, easily articulated English. But I do recommend you go and you read the Book of Enoch so you get an idea of just who this man was, why he was so incredibly important. And without Enoch, who was the world's very first Nevi, the very first prophet, he was the very first man to ever write scripture, ever. I highly recommend you look into that man, look into his writings, because if you do, you're going to understand the gravity of what I'm about to tell you. When you read about the life of Enoch, chronicled, again, mainly in the Book of Enoch, one thing that was very true about him, Enoch was a man that 7 generations after Adam, when the world was, the pre-flood antediluvian world was in a very chaotic state, the Watchers, the fallen divine beings who had come down into the world around the time of Jared, who was Enoch's father, when they came down into the world and they started to mate with women and they started to have children by those women, hybrid abominations, giants known as the Nephilim. By Enoch's time, the pre-flood world was incredibly sin-ridden. It was an absolute apocalyptic no man's land. The state of the human spirit, the human conscience at that point had turned about as far away from Father as you could possibly get. And what's most telling is when Enoch came along, he was a man that was unlike all the other people in the world at that time. He was of the righteous lineage of Seth, from Adam and Eve's third son, that started that righteous bloodline that had been untainted and remained untainted by the line of the Watchers and the Nephilim. Their genetics were mostly pure in that context. They weren't spiritually tainted. Yes, Enoch was of that righteous line, but Enoch was also very faithful and righteous to Father in a way that nobody else in the world at that time was. He had a heart that was inclined to obey Father, adhere to him, listen to him, and because of that, Father put him into the world. He birthed him into the world, into a time when he needed a man like Enoch, because he took Enoch. The reason why Enoch walked with Father for over 300 years and then he simply wasn't, for Father took him, is because in that period of time when Father took Enoch, he was showing Enoch all the secrets of the cosmos. He was revealing to him prophecies, divine declarations that dealt with events that would encompass everything from the coming flood to the post-flood world, the coming of Yezriah, all the way down to the coming of the suffering Messiah, which was Yahshua, and even all the way down to the modern day. Enoch was taken all over the world by divine, obedient angels who obviously were loyal to Father. He was taken all over the world. He was shown, in the ancient world, mind you, he was taken all over the world. He was shown physical geographic locations nobody could have ever known about in that time because those parts of the world were simply uninhabited. Even in the pre-flood world, he was shown spiritual locations. He was shown visions of what the world would be like after the flood. So Enoch was a man who was so righteous and so loyal to Father that when the text reads and conveys that Enoch walked with Elohim, and he was not, for Elohim took him, Father took him, that one statement is so much deeper than almost anybody else ever considers. And I find it always to be very interesting, in the worst way, that one of the things that the worm, that Satan, really wanted to do, Satan, was through the efforts of nearsighted, deceived leaders of the ecumenical body of the assemblies in the nascent early beginnings of the faith, the Roman-led church, that through the efforts of so many of these early theologians, leaders of the early assemblies in the Roman Catholic Church, or just the universal church, because it's important to derive a distinction between the very primitive early Roman church and what became the Roman Catholic Church as we know it, more in a more contemporary fashion today. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church as we know it didn't start gaining legs until several hundred years down the road after the establishment of the faith. But the early nascent form, the early beginning form of the Roman Church, I find it to be interesting how one of the most pointed and concerted efforts that the worm ever did was it mitigated the role of Enoch, to where in the scriptures that were eventually ratified, canonized, and considered by these same church authorities over hundreds of years, okay, this is what's going to be considered canonical. This is what is considered profitable for teaching. This is our canonized Holy Scripture. That at the end of that process, when the Bible the Scripture started to take on the look that we recognize it and compare it with most to our modern Bibles, that when this occurred, canonization was largely completed. Enoch's role was vastly diminished, to where now he's mostly relegated to a footnote in Bereshith and Genesis, one verse. And then later on in Yehuda and Jude, he's quoted. A passage out of the book of Enoch is quoted once. It's funny that Enoch was relegated to that, and that it made such a concerted effort to do that because of how important Enoch was. Because when you understand Enoch's life, when you understand how he walked with Father, the things he saw, the things Father showed him, you understand what it means when it was written in Bereshith and Genesis, he walked with Elohim. In a world, in the pre-flood world that was so corrupt and so evil and so wicked, the giants, the Nephilim, were basically ruling the world. They had eaten up almost all the produce of man. They were even cannibalizing mankind. They were ruling ruthlessly over man. And even the men who were alive, most of them were wicked and evil. If it wasn't the Kodesh, the chosen, set-apart, righteous line, which Enoch was a part of, which basically they were just a small little traveling nomadic group of people. If you weren't of the righteous line, then even the men who were alive at the time, they were wicked, evil. They had been so polluted by the wicked things that had been taught to them by the Watchers, the fallen divine beings who came down and mated with women, that they had turned to sin. And that's one of the reasons why in Bereshith and Genesis it says that Father looked down and he saw that every intention of the will of man, every intention in his heart was corrupt from his birth. So to be a man that walked with Father in the time that Enoch lived was incredibly hard, because he lived in a time when almost nobody else did. He lived in such a sin-sick, fallen world that it was considered to be a dangerous practice to walk with Father, to walk by the righteous precepts of the Almighty creating Elohim, the Creator, because, again, the Nephilim ruled. These dark, abominable hybrids, these satanic beings ruled the world. And therefore, if you were seen worshiping and being dedicated and loyal to the true living creator, the true living Elohim, you'd be killed. Flat out, they would kill you. And oftentimes they would do worse than just kill you. To be a man who walked with Elohim like Enoch did, to be a service to Father like Enoch was, to be shown all the things he was shown, to write everything down that he did, to be recorded throughout the generations. To do that, it took a massive, massive amount of commitment on his part. He lived in fear all the time. He knew that nobody else in the world believed like him or agreed with him, except for his immediate family. Everybody else would have mocked him, made him out to be a nobody, made him out to be a crackpot, some overly righteous hypocrite who didn't live by the established wicked laws of the land in the pre-flood world. He was an outcast. He was like a leper. He was treated literally like a leper. The man had to sacrifice and give up everything around him to do what he did and walk with Father. Now, why is that important? Why did I spend almost half an hour telling you that? Because Father calls for nothing more and nothing less than for a believer, a child of his, to walk with him. To walk with Father is hard. You have to walk with him in faith, terrifying faith. You have to literally be willing to step out into the great unknown with absolutely no assurance of where you're going and what's going to happen, and just on the pure faith that Father is going to be there, he's going to catch you, and he's going to lead you. Walking with Father, a true walk. And I don't mean the kind of walk that most Christians walk. I don't mean most garden variety Christians that say they have faith, say they believe, but they really don't. Their faith is more of a hobby for them. I mean to be a true, thoroughbred, tested in tribulation and the fires of refinement child of Yah. To walk with Father in that way, like Enoch did, is the hardest thing you will ever do in your entire life. To walk with Elohim, to walk with Father, is a path everybody should strive for. Everybody in the entire world. But it is a path. It is a walk that maybe 2% will ever actually take. Because it's too hard. It seems too impossible. It's too scary. You have to live in uncertainty and nothing more than blind faith so much that for the faint of heart, it will break you down. It will destroy your mind. Because you don't have the same assurances as if you were living purely by your own physical means. Pretending like you have faith. Pretending like you're a believer. Saying, oh, I'm a Christian. Oh, I'm a believer. Oh, I'm this. Oh, I'm that. But you never actually have to put your faith to the test. You never actually have to do anything to put your money where your mouth is and to walk a path of hardcore faith with Father. Most people will never do that, because that path to walk with Father like Enoch did, in a path of pure devotion, pure love, pure faith, pure obedience, for most people, it seems too impossible. Now, it is possible, and it can be done. Enoch did it. Moshe did it. Joshua did it. You can do it. But it's hard. And the reason I'm telling you this is not to discourage you. I'm trying to encourage you to go and look into the writings of Enoch. Study about this man. Look into what this man was. And that's going to give you a much better idea of just what it is the Father expects out of his children today. The kind of walk he wants you to walk with him. Because, again, literally, Moshe walked in the same way with Father. Blind, terrifying faith. Joshua walked in the same way with Father that Enoch did. Joshua walked with Father in horrible, blind, terrifying faith, all the way to a terrible end. All those men walked the same path with Father, complete, absolute, unyielding to the bitter end. That's the kind of faith, that's the kind of walk Father wants us all to walk. And yes, it is hard. Your understanding, your beliefs, your convictions, your predisposition to the world around you, all of your preconceived notions just go, they are put, every single one, on the chopping block. And you have to be willing to sacrifice them and give them up to walk Father's way and to do what He wants, to make Him happy, to please Him, to walk with Him in such lockstep like Enoch did, that you are of the most ideal form of service to Him. And that's hard. Very hard. In a lot of ways, I can empathize with how Enoch must have felt in his time, because in a weird way, even though we don't have giants running around, huge Nephilim, eating up everything and cannibalizing humans, because the spirit of the Nephilim endured in the world, and even today is possessing so many people, we live in the exact same time of evil, sin. The entire natural order has been made a complete abomination of in this time, no different than in the days of Enoch, what the Nephilim did. Their watcher parents and then the Nephilim. They not only taught man things that they weren't meant to know, paganism, sorcery, idolatry, but they also made abominations of nature. They took creatures Father made and twisted them into abominable monsters. And isn't that funny? That's exactly what the Nephilim did in the pre-flood world. They made biological abominations of animals and even of man. I mean, the Nephilim themselves were abomination, hybrid divine beings and human. And today, we see the exact same biological abomination going on today, just in a very different way. Transgenderism, claiming a non-binary status. People are literally today in labs all around the world. Scientists are trying to manipulate the human genetic code. They're trying to clone. They're trying to mess with the DNA of people. Scientists have been messing with the DNA of animals forever now. People think they can change and swap their gender through gender science operations, taking medications, hormonal medications. Literally, the spirit of the Nephilim, the same evil that the worm, that it worked through the Watchers that served it and through the Nephilim offspring, the same kind of evil that it was introducing to the world in the pre-flood days. The abominations are literally occurring in the exact same way today. And, the Book of Enoch even records that when the sin, the abominations in the pre-flood world got so bad that even the natural world, the weather phenomenon, everything started to act against its natural course. The weather of the world today is so messed up. The climates, everything is just so out of control. Even animals aren't acting right anymore. I mean, we heard a story from our neighbor who, she has cattle, and one of her heifers had 2 calves, and she said that the one calf died. It was stillborn, and the mother literally refused to nurse the living calf. She rejected it, and instead she tried to feed the stillborn calf. I can't tell you how many stories I've been hearing over the last couple of years in nature of animals that are acting weird and crazy. In the natural world, amongst humans, the abominations that are being wrought upon the human genome. I mean, for instance, over 200 to 300 years of humans taking more and more and more medicines and vaccinations, and with the Western idea of medicine and science and trying to heal and get rid of every single human ailment and problem. People have been taking medications now for so many decades. The governments of the world, especially the United States, have allowed so many chemicals, even today, to be put into our foods that if you look at any young person today, I can't tell you how many young people that I see, college age kids, when I go out to town, I look around, so many women who they don't really have the body of women anymore. They're so skinny and small, and they have no curvation, no natural feminine curves. The men look so skinny and small and sickly. They don't look strong. They don't look in any way like a male, a masculine male. And that's a trend that I've been noticing over the last several years, especially of this last generation, the last 2 generations. Humans have been being literally made and bred weaker. People are getting sick more now than ever. More babies are being born with all kinds of issues, birth defects, mental issues than ever before. The human genome is sick. Humans are being born sick right now. The world, the very state of man, the image of Elohim, man who Father made in his image, is sick. No different than in the days of the flood, the pre-flood, in the antediluvian world. No different in the days of the Watchers and the Nephilim. The physical abominations they brought to the world through the meshing with women, the physical siring of children, the actual physical contaminant, warping creatures Father made and creating monsters. The same exact thing is happening now, just in a very different way. Those same spirits of darkness are infiltrating people, and it's making humans sick, making our environment sick, the weather of the world. It's making animals act strange. It's no different. The reason I'm saying that is because I totally understand what Enoch must have felt when he was trying to walk with Father in his days, when the pre-flood world was so sick. Because Enoch lived to see the flood. I mean, the books of Enoch and some of the other patristic writings, such as the book of Jubilees, the book of, I think, the book of Noah. Yeah, they vary. Which the book of Noah is really kind of it's an addendum. It's attached to the book of Enoch. It's fragments, but regardless, Enoch lived to see the flood, or right up to the flood. So he was in the world at the time when the sickness of sin had just consumed the land. And to walk with Father in that kind of a time was an almost impossible task, because the evil was so present everywhere. I can understand, like I said, why it was so hard for Enoch, because I know with me and my family, we feel the same way. We are total outcasts in the world around us. We don't agree with really anything that the world thinks and tries to push as being morally sound and acceptable today. We are totally on the outside looking in, and the odd man out with almost everyone we know, neighbors. We don't really have any friends. I mean, I totally understand and get what it's like. And it is because walking with Father in the way that Enoch did it's exactly what Father calls for, and it is exactly what he's owed. But because the days we live in is identical to what it was like in the days of Enoch, it makes it so much harder. But I do highly recommend you to go and actually look up for yourself the writings of Enoch. Understand and read what that man's life was like, what the world was like in his time. And you will see that is the exact same kind of walk Father demands that his true children walk with him. And you will see, then when you compare it to our world and you say, but it's so hard today though to do that. And you'll say, yeah, it is. It's how it's supposed to be. It's the only right way. You know, people like Enoch, people like Moshe, well, better example would be Elijah, who he was taken up in a chariot of fire right to heaven, never tasted death, or Enoch, who simply was not, for Father took him. Those men basically were like an early precursor of what it will be like for the humans who decided to accept the gift of salvation Father was giving through Yahshua and become children of Yah. If you walk with Father in the same way Enoch did before Yahshua, the same way Elijah did before Yahshua, those two men completely dedicated their life to Father in every way and walked with him in lockstep. Those men, the way they walked, that is exactly the kind of walk that children of Yah, who are born anew under the renewed covenant, that is the exact same kind of walk that we are supposed to emulate. Those early patriarchal figures were a model. They were a form, a shadow of what was to come. It is what we are supposed to emulate, the walk that they walked. Because I say this to you now, and this is why Yahshua said, think about it, that the way to life was narrow and few found it. The way to destruction was broad and many went through it. Why do you think Yahshua used the parable, the metaphor of gates, basically of ways, like physical pathways to walk through? Why do you think he did that? Because Enoch walked with Elohim, walked with Father. Elijah walked with Father. Living a life how Father wants us to is symbolized and even legitimatized in a literal sense as walking with him. We use our ability to walk with our physical feet, a life that is in lockstep with Father. Yahshua was proving in his words that our life as believers is meant to emulate the life of men like Enoch and Elijah, and that we are to walk with Father in the same way they did, utter, complete obedience and righteousness and faith, because if we do, then we will walk through the same place that Elijah, and Enoch did. We will find and walk through the narrow way. And then we will cease to be. We will be not. For now we will be in the heavenly. Literally. If you walk with them the same way, walk with Father in that same way, if you find and walk through the narrow way, then this physical body, when your life is up, will cease to be, but your spirit, you will cease to be, for Father will take you, and you will be with him. But if you walk contrary to Father, and do not walk with him, as it says Enoch walked with Yah, and he was not, for Yah or Elohim took him. If you do not walk with Father in that way, then you will walk through the broad gate, the broad way, that leads to destruction. And that is a path that many, no different than the Nephilim and the humans in the pre-flood world did, no different than so many people today do, you will walk through that broad gate of destruction, and you will go into destruction. And that's it.